Imagine a world where humans walked, created and thrived, yet left almost no trace behind. A world stretching over 100,000 years before cities, before writing, before history as we know it. What secrets did our ancestors carry? What wonders and dangers did they face in lands and oceans now lost to time? Welcome to a journey into the invisible chapters of humanity, where every discovery sparks awe and every mystery pulls you deeper. If you're ready to drift into a world that history forgot, to uncover stories of courage, ingenuity, and survival long before civilization began, join this channel. Subscribe now and let us guide you through the lost 100,000 years of human history, one immersive story at a time. Around 200,000 years ago, the land we now call Africa was a vast mosaic of forests, rivers, and open plains, alive with sounds of creatures that had long since vanished. Amidst the swaying grasses and dense canopies, early humans moved cautiously, their steps measured, their eyes alert to both prey and predator. They were not the fully modern humans we imagine, yet neither were they primitive in mind or spirit. They carried within them the spark of curiosity, the need to explore, and the instinct to survive in a world that offered both abundance and peril. Each day brought new challenges, tracking herds of antelope across shifting landscapes, seeking clean water in distant rivers, and learning which plants could sustain life and which could bring swift death. The skies above shifted with seasons that reshaped the terrain. Wet periods turned the savannas into lush expanses, while prolonged droughts forced movement toward regions unknown. Our ancestors navigated these changes without maps, guided by memory, the sun, and the subtle signs of nature. They observed the flight of birds, the direction of winds, and the patterns of animal migration, creating a mental map that stretched far beyond their immediate surroundings. Every night, as darkness fell over the land, they gathered around flickering fires, sharing silent glances and unspoken knowledge, learning to cooperate in ways that would define the future of humanity. Yet, for all their activity and ingenuity, almost nothing remains to mark their passage. Tools of stone and bone may survive in scattered fragments, but the stories of daily life, the laughter of a child, the tension of a hunt, the quiet moments of reflection beside a river, have been swallowed by time. It is in this gap, this vast stretch of human existence without written record, that the greatest mystery lies. What rituals shaped their minds? How did they communicate ideas that could not yet be written? What dreams flickered behind their eyes as they gazed at the stars, wondering about the movements of the sun and moon? The immensity of this unrecorded era forces the modern imagination to wander. Scholars and archaeologists can trace footprints, remnants of fire, and scattered tools, yet these are but whispers of a civilization invisible to history. For every fossilized bone, countless stories are lost, an invisible culture that thrived, adapted, and perhaps even flourished in ways we can only guess. The silence of this time is profound. It invites speculation and compels awe. In contemplating the lost 100,000 years before recorded history, one cannot help but feel the weight of absence. Humanity, in its earliest form, existed in a world unshaped by writing, unbound by cities, and untouched by the conventions of civilization that would emerge tens of thousands of years later. Yet the people of this era were real, active and deliberate, living lives full of discovery, danger, and quiet triumphs. The question that haunts modern understanding is simple yet staggering. In a time so vast and so underexplored, what remarkable human stories, insights, and innovations were created, only to vanish without a trace, leaving us to reconstruct their world from fragments of earth, bone, and stone. Beyond the familiar landscapes of Africa, a restless movement began, driven by instinct, curiosity, and the subtle pressures of survival. Small bands of humans ventured into territories they had never seen, leaving behind the only home they had ever known. The journey was neither swift nor straightforward. They crossed rugged mountains whose jagged peaks tore at the sky, waded through rivers swollen with seasonal rains, and braved deserts where the sun scorched the earth and water was a fleeting promise. Each step carried the risk of hunger, disease, and encounters with predators far more formidable than themselves. Lions, hyenas, and other large carnivores roamed these lands, observing the newcomers as much as the humans observed them, and every miscalculation could end in death. Despite these perils, early humans adapted in extraordinary ways. They learned to read the subtle signs of the environment, the tracks of animals, the drift of clouds, the direction of the wind. Shelter became essential. Natural caves, overhangs, and eventually rudimentary constructions offered refuge from the elements and predators alike. Fire, still a newly mastered tool, served as protection, warmth, and a gathering point for shared knowledge. With each passing season, humans pushed further into unknown lands, developing strategies to hunt unfamiliar creatures, gather new types of plants, and navigate regions without any prior guidance. Archaeological evidence hints at their far-reaching journeys. Footprints fossilized in mud thousands of years ago show humans traversing continents far from Africa, yet the absence of written record leaves an eerie silence. How did they know where to go? How did they survive winters harsher than any experienced at home, or cross rivers teeming with unseen dangers? The questions persist because tangible records are almost non-existent. Each migration was a gamble, a test of resilience and ingenuity, and every surviving artifact is a testament to lives lived at the edge of the known world. The expanses they travelled were often unforgiving. Shifting ice sheets, volcanic activity, and treacherous terrain demanded constant movement and adaptation. Humans relied on keen observation, memory, and a deep understanding of animal behaviour to locate food and avoid hazards. They learned the rhythms of seasonal change, tracking the movement of herds and the blossoming of edible plants, often anticipating events years in advance based on experience passed from one generation to the next. This silent communication, transmitted through gestures, sounds, and mimicry, became the framework for cooperation that would sustain them across vast, uncharted regions. In the absence of cities, roads, or written maps, each journey was an act of courage and improvisation. The scattered evidence left behind, tools fashioned from stone, subtle marks of temporary shelters, and traces of fire, offers tantalizing glimpses into the lives of these pioneers. Their legacy is a story written in footprints, not parchment, a history preserved in the shifting sands of time rather than in archives. As humans spread across continents, they left faint yet undeniable marks of presence, a silent testimony to survival against the odds. Every step into unknown lands was a confrontation with uncertainty, a negotiation with the environment, and a declaration of human tenacity. The mystery of their existence in distant territories lingers. How did they persevere, innovate, and thrive in landscapes that held nothing familiar, no guideposts, no assurance? Theirs was a journey without precedent, and every trace they left invites wonder at the courage and adaptability of our ancestors. As humans pressed further into lands already inhabited by other human species, they encountered beings who were both familiar and alien. Neanderthals, stocky and muscular, moved with the confidence of creatures perfectly adapted to cold European forests, while the elusive Denisovans left traces only in caves and fragments of bone. To the early modern humans venturing into these territories, these encounters must have been moments of awe, fear, and profound curiosity. Some meetings may have been tense standoffs, eyes locked across firelit clearings, each party measuring the other's strength and intent. Other encounters might have been more subtle, opportunities for exchange of knowledge, techniques, and survival strategies that were as valuable as any tool or weapon. Evidence for these interactions is scarce, leaving only tantalizing hints behind. DNA extracted from fossils tells a story invisible to the eye. Our ancestors interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans, weaving their genetic legacy into the tapestry of modern humans. This invisible thread suggests more than simple coexistence. It implies encounters that shaped not just survival, but identity, adaptation, and the subtle inheritance of traits that would influence generations to come. Yet the archaeological record offers only fragments, tools, hearths, and faint traces of campsites, allowing only partial glimpses into these ancient meetings. One can imagine the silence in which exchanges occurred, the careful observation, the cautious mimicry of unfamiliar techniques, and the tentative trust required to share knowledge in a world where miscalculation could be fatal. These interactions were shaped by environment as much as by temperament. Harsh climates demanded cooperation when resources were scarce, but competition surely arose when hunting grounds overlapped. Perhaps early humans learned the art of stone tool refinement from neighbours, or discovered new methods of clothing and shelter in exchange or imitation. Perhaps they absorbed lessons in fire management, foraging, or hunting strategies that allowed them to thrive in unfamiliar landscapes. At the same time, cultural differences may have sparked conflicts or inspired avoidance, a dance of caution and opportunity that left only whispers in the bones and sediments of prehistoric sites. Caves that once served as shelters still hold faint markings of these shared spaces. Hand stencils, charcoal lines, and stone tools suggest both simultaneous occupation and sequential habitation, hinting at interactions without giving specifics. Did they communicate through gestures, sounds, or early language? Did they recognize kinship in one another, or did survival instincts dominate every encounter? These questions linger, unresolved, as researchers painstakingly piece together a story from what little is endured. The presence of these other humans also reshaped migration and adaptation. Facing populations already adapted to cold or high-altitude environments, modern humans had to innovate, borrowing strategies for survival, adjusting hunting techniques, and navigating unfamiliar terrains. Each encounter demanded flexibility of thought, a willingness to learn and adapt rapidly, and a capacity to assess risk and reward in real time. These experiences left imprints not only on the body but on the social behaviours and cultural practices that would eventually define our species. In imagining these moments, one glimpses a world alive with complexity, where multiple human species navigated the same lands, sometimes colliding, sometimes coexisting, and often leaving behind only fragments of their lives. The mystery of these encounters remains, encoded in DNA and scattered tools, challenging modern humans to reconstruct a history that is simultaneously intimate and unknowable. Within this interplay of cooperation, conflict, and quiet observation lies a crucial chapter of the lost 100,000 years, one that shaped the genetic and cultural heritage of every human alive today. In the shadows of prehistory, humans experimented endlessly with the materials around them, fashioning tools and constructing shelters that allowed them to manipulate the world in ways previously unimaginable. Flint was chipped into precise points for hunting, bones were carved into needles for sewing hides, and wood was shaped into spears capable of felling prey at a distance. Fire, long mastered, became more than a source of warmth. It was a tool of transformation, softening hides, cooking food, and perhaps even forging rudimentary metal or minerals, although evidence has been lost to the centuries. Each innovation, though seemingly simple, demanded foresight, patience, and an understanding of cause and effect, qualities that speak to a hidden genius in these early humans. Some of these creations may have been fleeting, designed for immediate need, and abandoned once they fulfilled their purpose. Others could have represented more sophisticated thought, such as structures for storage, hidden traps for hunting, or communal spaces that brought people together for planning and storytelling. The scarcity of physical remnants does not equate to scarcity of ingenuity. On the contrary, the very absence of evidence hints at a civilization that existed in transient adaptive forms, leaving its mark not in monuments or writing, but in subtle alterations to the landscape, patterns of habitation, and innovations passed down orally or through imitation. It is possible that some inventions were astonishingly advanced yet ephemeral. Perhaps they developed systems for water collection, early forms of agriculture, or methods for preserving food that predated any known settlements. Small-scale social hierarchies may have emerged around hunting parties with leaders and specialists coordinating tasks essential to survival. Communities could have exchanged knowledge over vast distances, trading techniques for crafting tools or managing fire, creating networks of information now invisible to modern eyes. These hints suggest a complexity of thought that challenges our assumptions about primitive humans and their capacity to shape the world around them. The loss of these technologies is both tragic and tantalizing. Archaeologists uncover fragments of stone tools or fire pits, but the broader picture remains frustratingly incomplete. What kind of societies might have risen and fallen entirely before written history, leaving only the smallest traces behind? Could entire networks of trade, communication, or shared innovation have existed, only to vanish without a trace as populations moved, climates shifted, or disasters struck? These questions cast a long shadow over our understanding of the human past, revealing that survival was not merely a matter of brute force but of intellect, collaboration, and creativity. Even the tools that survive hint at the sophistication of early human minds. A finely chipped spear point reflects knowledge of leverage, force, and precision. A fire pit strategically placed near windbreaks and water demonstrates planning, environmental awareness, and foresight. Clothing fashioned from hides was tailored to specific climates, protecting against cold and heat, while shelters carved into caves or erected from branches suggest spatial reasoning and architectural instinct. Each act of ingenuity was a small revolution, a testament to the capacity of humans to innovate under conditions of uncertainty and scarcity. Imagining these lost technologies opens a window into a world of potential discoveries that may forever remain hidden. Societies capable of complex social coordination, long-distance planning, and technological creativity could have thrived for generations, yet the record is silent. Their genius, fleeting though it may have been, challenges the modern assumption that progress is linear, or that ancient humans were less capable than their descendants. In this hidden past, intelligence was practical, innovation was survival, and the potential for entire civilizations exists in the gaps of history, waiting in shadows for recognition that may never come. Over tens of thousands of years, the Earth itself became both adversary and teacher to early humans. Colossal ice sheets advanced across continents, swallowing forests and plains beneath their unyielding weight. Glaciers ground valleys into sharp edges, diverted rivers into unknown courses, and plunged the climate into brutal cold. Volcanic eruptions spewed ash across skies, darkening days and poisoning waters, while tremors and lava flows reshaped familiar landscapes in moments. These cataclysms were indiscriminate, reshaping environments faster than human populations could often adapt. For those who survived, every choice, when to move, what to eat, how to shield themselves, was a gamble with the planet itself. Communities were forced into continual motion, migrating toward temperate zones, following retreating herds, or seeking refuge in caves insulated from ice winds. Fires were tended with extreme care, sustaining warmth and cooking food in an unforgiving climate. Clothing, once simple, had to become more sophisticated, layered, and insulated against the harshness of each passing season. Every element of daily life was a negotiation with survival. Even minor miscalculations in timing or location could mean death in a single storm, blizzard, or volcanic cloud. Early humans became masters of adaptation, learning to interpret subtle signs in the environment that indicated changes in weather, animal patterns, or plant cycles. These periods of upheaval also shaped social structures. Small groups may have coalesced into larger communities for protection against predators and the elements, pooling knowledge and labor to increase survival odds. Yet the same pressures could have torn populations apart, scattering groups across regions, leaving temporary settlements to be swallowed by mudslides, ice, or lava. Entire communities could rise in fertile valleys, only to vanish within a generation due to sudden floods or eruptions, leaving barely a trace of their existence. The silence of these lost civilizations is deafening. The land bears faint, almost invisible imprints of ingenuity that were extinguished before permanent structures or records could be established. Some adaptations may have been subtle, invisible to modern excavation. Humans learned to predict seasonal shifts by observing animal migrations and plant cycles, developed strategies to ration scarce food, and discovered hidden water sources in drought-stricken regions. These techniques likely passed from one generation to the next through oral instruction, gestures, and imitation, creating ephemeral knowledge networks that could disappear entirely if a community perished. In this way, each climatic catastrophe not only tested survival but also determined which knowledge endured and which vanished. Volcanic winters and ice-driven famines forced humans into constant creativity. Hunting techniques adapted to the sudden scarcity of prey, tool-making evolved to suit frozen or rugged terrain, and communal cooperation became essential in confronting the relentless unpredictability of nature. Each disaster was both a threat and a crucible, shaping the resilience, ingenuity, and social dynamics of early humans. Evidence of these vanished populations is patchy, leaving gaps in the narrative of human history where imagination must supplement archaeology. The story of this era is one of endurance in the face of relentless environmental upheaval. Entire civilizations may have arisen in fertile valleys or along rivers, only to disappear under layers of ash or ice. Their loss is almost total, yet the echoes remain in subtle ways. Fragments of tools, shifts in migration patterns, genetic legacies, and the enduring capacity for human adaptability. In contemplating these climatic catastrophes, One recognizes the fragility of human life against the backdrop of geological forces, and yet also marvels at the determination and ingenuity that allowed humans not just to survive, but to continue their journey across continents, leaving traces of a world we can scarcely reconstruct. As the millennia unfolded, humans pushed the boundaries of the known world, moving not only across continents, but eventually toward the uncharted expanses of water. The oceans, vast and unpredictable, presented challenges unlike anything encountered on land. Currents could sweep rafts off course in moments, storms could erupt without warning, and the horizon offered no familiar landmarks. Yet, driven by necessity, curiosity, or sheer audacity, early humans constructed simple watercraft, rafts bound with reeds, logs lashed together with vines, and later boats capable of carrying families and supplies across narrow straits and open seas. These crossings were not casual excursions, they were calculated risks, each journey a delicate negotiation with wind, wave, and the unknown. Navigating without compasses, charts, or written instruction demanded extraordinary observational skill. Travellers read the flight patterns of birds, noting which species returned daily from distant land. They studied the behaviour of fish and the colour of the water, interpreting subtle shifts as indicators of nearby land. Celestial cues, the rising and setting of the sun, the position of stars at night, guided them across vast distances, transforming the night sky into a map in constant motion. Every successful crossing reinforced knowledge that could be passed down orally, slowly building an invisible network of maritime understanding that stretched across generations and regions. The settlements they established on distant shores were remarkable in their adaptation. Islanders learned to exploit unfamiliar flora and fauna, discovering edible plants, harvesting shellfish, and tracking animals previously unknown. They developed tools suited to their new environment, fishing hooks from bone, nets woven from fibres, and traps for capturing agile creatures. These innovations, born of necessity, reflect both ingenuity and resilience. They also hint at social organisation, for such undertakings required cooperation, planning, and the sharing of knowledge, a collective effort to survive in isolation from the mainland. Yet evidence of these daring migrations is scarce. Archaeologists uncover isolated artefacts, a stone tool on a remote island, traces of a campfire beneath layers of sediment, or shells carved into ornaments. Each find is a window into journeys that would have been dangerous, painstaking and transformative. How early humans conceived of reaching unknown lands remains a mystery. Their courage and curiosity were immense, and the very act of leaving the familiar behind speaks to a relentless drive to explore and adapt. The human presence on these islands and continents predated previously accepted timelines, revealing a capacity for exploration far beyond what modern scholars once believed. Populations endured in isolation, shaping their environment and culture according to the constraints and opportunities they found. Their voyages were not guided by maps or compasses, yet they navigated with a combination of intuition, experience, and observation that rivals modern understanding of early navigation. In doing so, they laid the foundation for a human story that extended across oceans, connecting disparate lands long before the written word would record such exploits. The imagination conjures images of families and small bands setting out at dawn, pushing primitive rafts into rolling waves, eyes scanning for signs of land while storms gathered on the horizon. Each successful arrival meant survival, adaptation, and the possibility of thriving in a place untouched by humans. It also meant leaving behind the old world, carrying only knowledge, ingenuity, and resilience into environments that challenged every instinct and demanded constant innovation. These journeys across oceans remain one of the most extraordinary yet least understood chapters of human history, a testament to daring, creativity, and the boundless curiosity that has defined our species from the earliest days. In the dim recesses of caves and rocky shelters, early humans began to leave marks that transcended mere survival, hints of minds grappling with ideas, beliefs, and the unseen forces of their world. Walls bore streaks of ochre and charcoal, depicting animals in motion, abstract symbols, and figures whose meaning is now lost to time. Each stroke was deliberate, a silent testament to observation, imagination, and a desire to communicate something beyond the immediate needs of food and shelter. These artworks suggest that humans were not simply reacting to the environment, they were interpreting it, imagining it, and seeking to understand their place within it. Carvings on bones, stones, and wood also emerge sporadically, often in isolated locations that hint at special significance. Some appear to have been tools repurposed for symbolic expression. Others may have been ritual objects used in ceremonies or acts of remembrance. Burial practices hint at even deeper cognition. The careful placement of bodies, sometimes accompanied by tools, ornaments, or traces of pigment, suggests reverence, reflection, and perhaps a belief in an existence beyond life. These gestures reveal a capacity for abstract thought, empathy, and the recognition of continuity, qualities that form the foundation of culture. The scattered nature of these discoveries fuels fascination and frustration alike. Each site offers only a fragment of a story, leaving vast gaps that invite speculation. Were these images meant to educate, to honour the dead, to summon success in hunting, or to appease unseen forces? Did they tell the stories of everyday life, epic struggles, or mythic journeys? The absence of written records or consistent patterns makes it difficult to answer. What is clear is that humans of this era engaged in behaviours that suggest deep mental landscapes. Rituals and art were as integral to their existence as tools and fire. These expressions likely required collaboration, instruction, and repetition. The act of creating art in difficult-to-reach cave walls, for example, would demand coordination, scaffolding, and shared knowledge. Likewise, ritual practices, whether marking the passage of life or acknowledging death, point to social cohesion, moral codes, and a recognition of shared experience. In this sense, early humans were not merely surviving, they were constructing meaning, forging identities, and navigating the intangible dimensions of thought and belief. The fleeting nature of these cultural artifacts adds to their allure. Many artworks were lost to erosion, flooding, or human interference over millennia. Carvings faded or were buried, pigments washed away by water, and rituals left no permanent mark except in the imagination of observers. Modern humans encounter these traces like faint echoes, tantalizing glimpses into minds we can never fully comprehend. The mystery remains. What stories, lessons, or beliefs have been entirely erased? Which of these vanished practices shaped communities in ways we cannot reconstruct? And how might they have influenced behaviour, social organisation, or even survival strategies? In considering this, one begins to appreciate the complexity of prehistoric life. Survival and ingenuity alone do not capture the full scope of human existence. Art and ritual reveal that early humans were thinkers, storytellers, and observers of the ineffable. They sought to leave a mark, to record experience, and to interpret forces beyond their immediate comprehension. Though the majority of these creations are lost to history, the fragments that remain offer a glimpse of a world in which imagination, spirituality, and social cohesion played as vital a role as hunting and gathering. The mystery of these sporadic expressions continues to captivate, reminding us that the lost 100,000 years were filled with minds capable of wonder, reflection, and abstraction. In those darkened caves and silent burial sites, humans were engaging in the earliest forms of culture, reaching towards something greater than survival, and leaving behind traces of thought that challenge the modern imagination to reconstruct lives and beliefs long vanished from memory. The passage of time has proven to be both a preserver and a destroyer of human history. Across continents, entire settlements that may have flourished for generations have been swallowed by shifting soils, floods, or volcanic ash. Rivers changed course, washing away evidence of campsites. Winds and rains eroded shelters once carved into rock, and the relentless advance of vegetation obscured tracks and hearths that might once have offered insight into daily life. Even human activity has played its part later. Populations scavenged stone tools, altered landscapes, or built over ancient sites, inadvertently erasing traces of those who came before. What survives is often fragmented, tantalizingly incomplete, and difficult to interpret, leaving modern archaeologists to piece together puzzles from mere shards. The challenge is immense. Excavations reveal scattered stone points, the charred remnants of fires, or impressions in soft sediments, each requiring careful analysis to determine age, function, and context. Yet the majority of what humans left behind has been lost, leaving holes in the narrative that may never be filled. Even when multiple artifacts are discovered, Connecting them into a coherent story is speculative. Without written records or continuous occupation, the meaning behind each find is elusive. Researchers must infer behavior from material traces, reconstruct social organization from the positioning of objects, and estimate population movements from subtle environmental clues. Each interpretation is tentative, hypothesis constructed on the edge of certainty. In some instances, entire civilizations may have disappeared without leaving even the faintest impression. Temporary shelters, campsites used for only a season, or small bands of hunters may have left behind nothing but a few tools scattered across a plain. The landscapes that once teemed with human presence have returned to nature, concealing centuries of activity beneath layers of soil and debris. With every century that passes, the probability of uncovering intact evidence diminishes, making the effort to understand the lost 100,000 years increasingly urgent and simultaneously more frustrating. This scarcity of material has profound implications. Are we truly uncovering history, or are we merely glimpsing fragments of forgotten worlds? The artifacts that survive may reflect only the most durable or widely used objects, leaving entire aspects of culture, belief, and social organization invisible. Technologies, rituals, and forms of knowledge that were transient in nature, passed orally, practiced briefly, or left in perishable materials, may be entirely lost to us. What reaches the present is filtered by chance, survival, and decay, selection dictated not by significance but by durability. Despite these limitations, each discovery carries immense value. A single flint point can suggest migration patterns. A hearth can illuminate diet and social interaction. A shell ornament can hint at trade or symbolic expression. Archaeologists labour painstakingly to extract these whispers from the soil, using careful excavation, chemical analysis, and comparison to reconstruct timelines and behaviours. The work is slow and deliberate, requiring both scientific precision and imaginative empathy to bridge the gaps between evidence and narrative. The disappearing clues of prehistory compel us to confront the vast unknown. The lost 100,000 years are punctuated by moments of insight, but overwhelmingly defined by absence. Every artifact uncovered is a victory over time, yet it represents only a fraction of what once was. The endeavour forces modern humans to navigate between certainty and speculation, piecing together stories from shadows and accepting that the vast majority of human experience from this era may remain forever beyond reach. It is a humbling reminder that history is never complete, that human ingenuity and culture have long existed in forms both ephemeral and enduring, and that much of the world our ancestors inhabited remains tantalizingly invisible. Beneath the surface of our visible history lies a second record, written not on stone or in clay, but in the strands of DNA passed down through countless generations. Within these microscopic sequences, scientists have begun to uncover astonishing stories of interbreeding, migration, and survival, revealing a hidden ancestry that traditional archaeology could scarcely imagine. Modern humans carry fragments of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA, subtle imprints of encounters that occurred tens of thousands of years ago. These genetic echoes are not merely curiosities, they shaped adaptation, immunity, and perhaps even cognitive abilities, leaving traces of lives, decisions, and alliances long vanished from memory. DNA analysis has illuminated migration patterns that defy earlier assumptions. Genes reveal journeys across continents, the interweaving of populations previously thought to be isolated, and the survival of lineages that may have endured harsh climates, famine, and conflict. Each genetic marker is a breadcrumb hinting at human networks, encounters, and expansions that left no architectural or written record. In some regions, populations show unexpected admixtures, evidence of long-forgotten crossings and unions that challenge traditional narratives. These findings suggest that human history was far more interconnected and dynamic than the fragmentary archaeological record alone can convey. Yet the genetic record has its limitations. While it can indicate movement, mixing, and some aspects of adaptation, it cannot reveal the cultures, beliefs, rituals, or social structures that defined early communities. Entire civilizations may leave no trace in DNA beyond a few markers, and knowledge of technologies, art, or language is largely irretrievable. Genetics hints at what occurred but cannot fully reconstruct the human experience. It is a skeleton of history, skeletal and silent, offering outlines where stories, emotions, and daily life remain inaccessible. Even so, these invisible threads allow us to imagine connections across vast expanses of space and time. DNA tells of a mother in Central Asia whose descendants travelled thousands of miles to the edges of Europe, of populations that adapted to high altitudes in Asia through inherited genes, of interactions between humans and other hominins that changed the very blueprint of our species. These revelations add depth to the human narrative, suggesting that survival, movement, and adaptation were collaborative processes, shaped not by a single group or culture, but by networks of humans whose lives intersected in ways only partially visible to us today. In contemplating these genetic echoes, the mystery of the lost 100,000 years grows more profound. We see footprints of existence, interconnections, and inherited traits, yet the stories themselves remain largely untold. What myths, philosophies, or complex societies accompanied these genetic exchanges? What forms of art, ritual, or communal knowledge have vanished entirely, leaving no imprint beyond DNA? The mind struggles to reconstruct a civilization from markers that are both intimate and abstract, human and mathematical, precise and incomplete. Ultimately, genetics offers a humbling perspective on human history. It reveals that the past is neither linear nor isolated, that every modern human carries the legacy of countless interactions, migrations, and adaptations that stretch back into darkness. Yet even as we decode these sequences, the full richness of early human life, its culture, complexity, and genius, remains tantalizingly out of reach. Our DNA is both a map and a mystery, a reminder that the lost 100,000 years contain worlds of experience that persist in hidden ways, shaping who we are, while leaving much of their story forever beyond our grasp. The lost 100,000 years of human history stretch across the mind like an immense canvas, painted in shades both visible and invisible. Archaeology, genetics, and paleontology offer glimpses of a world that once teemed with ingenuity, courage, and adaptability. Yet each discovery only illuminates a fraction of the story. Across continents and oceans, humans migrated, adapted, and innovated, leaving behind traces in stone, bone, and DNA that hint at remarkable achievements, and at mysteries that will likely remain forever unsolved. The more we uncover, the more we realize how vast the gaps remain, how much of human experience has been swallowed by time, climate, or the simple fragility of evidence. In imagining these centuries before recorded history, one sees humans as explorers, inventors, and thinkers, navigating landscapes of ice, fire, and unknown waters. They tamed fire, crafted tools, and developed early technologies whose complexity we can barely reconstruct. They created art, performed rituals, and nurtured social bonds, revealing minds capable of abstraction, creativity, and reflection. In meeting other human species, they exchanged knowledge, interbred, and left genetic legacies that persist within us today. These lives, lived in a world without writing, cities, or permanence, were no less rich or sophisticated than those chronicled in later civilizations. They were simply lost to the eye and preserved only faintly in fragmentary evidence and the silent record of DNA. The enduring mystery lies in the sheer scope of what we cannot know. For every cave painting or tool, countless others have vanished, eroded by wind and water, buried beneath sediments, or destroyed by later human activity. Entire communities may have risen and fallen without leaving more than a whisper of their existence. What beliefs guided them? What technologies or social structures might they have perfected, only to disappear entirely? How did their imagination shape their perception of the world, their survival strategies, and their interactions with each other? Science can provide hints, but the lives, dreams, and stories of these people are ultimately beyond full reconstruction. Yet there is wonder in that uncertainty. The lost 100,000 years remind us that human history is not confined to what is recorded in texts or preserved in ruins. It extends into shadows, into lives lived quietly but profoundly, where courage, ingenuity, and creativity thrive despite the absence of monuments or chronicles. Each fragment we uncover, be it a stone tool, a cave painting, a burial, or a genetic marker, is a small victory over the erasure of time, offering insight into the extraordinary adaptability and persistence of our species. In reflecting on this vanished past, we're compelled to acknowledge the limits of our knowledge while celebrating the remarkable resilience of humanity. The mysteries of these ancient millennia encourage curiosity, imagination, and humility, reminding us that the story of our species is far richer and more complex than any single discovery can convey. Countless secrets remain buried beneath layers of earth, waiting for chance, diligence, or insight to bring them into light. What civilizations, inventions, or ideas might still lie hidden, lost to memory but preserved in subtle traces. The thought is both humbling and thrilling, leaving the mind to wander through possibilities as boundless as time itself, marveling at the depths of human history we may never fully know. The lost 100,000 years endure as a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and mystery. A silent, sprawling narrative that challenges us to imagine, to explore, and to cherish the fragments we uncover, while accepting that the full story may forever remain just beyond reach. Long before skin carried meaning, before colour mattered at all, the first humans lived wrapped in a very different body. Their ancestors walked beneath an African sky that felt vast and unfamiliar, a sun that burned bright and steady day after day. Yet their bodies were not shaped to meet that light directly. Thick hair covered most of their skin, forming a natural layer between flesh and heat, much like other mammals that shared the plains and woodlands. In this early world, bare skin was rare and exposure was limited. Survival depended less on the surface of the body and more on movement, cooperation, and awareness of danger. These early humans did not yet think of the sun as a threat. It was simply part of the background of life, rising and setting with dependable rhythm. Shade could be found beneath trees, along riverbanks, or inside shallow shelters made of branches and leaves. The hair on their bodies trapped a thin layer of air close to the skin, reducing the direct impact of heat and helping regulate temperature during long days of walking. At night, that same covering provided warmth as temperatures dropped. Their skin beneath the hair remained relatively light, not because it was meant to be seen, but because it had never needed to change. Life unfolded slowly. Generations passed without dramatic shifts, each one inheriting the same general form as the last. Children were born, learned to walk, learned to follow, learned to forage. The sun watched silently as these lives repeated themselves, unaware that it would one day become a powerful force shaping the human body. At this stage, evolution had not yet turned its attention to skin. Other challenges mattered more: finding food, avoiding predators, enduring droughts and sudden storms. The landscape itself was in motion, even if change felt imperceptible within a single lifetime. Africa was not a single environment but a mosaic of grasslands, forests, and open savannas. As climate subtly shifted, resources moved and early humans followed. Walking longer distances became normal. Endurance mattered. Cooling the body during sustained movement slowly became more important than staying warm at rest. Still, hair remained useful, and skin stayed hidden. The sun continued to shine with the same intensity it always had, but the relationship between humans and their environment was quietly changing. Movement across open ground increased exposure. Time spent beneath direct light grew longer. Yet for now, hair absorbed much of the impact. The skin underneath remained largely protected, spared from the full force of ultraviolet radiation. No immediate pressure existed to alter pigmentation. Nature does not rush when patience works. What defined these early humans was not appearance, but adaptability. Their bodies were experiments in progress, shaped by countless small advantages rather than sudden transformations. Evolution worked invisibly, selecting what functioned well enough to last another generation. At this moment in the story, light skin was not a vulnerability, nor was it a strength. It was simply a starting point, inherited without question. Unknowingly, these early humans stood at the edge of a long transition. The sun above them had always been powerful, but its influence had not yet reached beneath the fur that shielded their skin. That balance would not last forever. Changes were already beginning, slow and subtle, written not in a single lifetime but across thousands of years. For now, the story remained quiet, resting in a time when skin was unseen, and the sun had not yet demanded an answer from the human body. As generation continued to pass, the land itself began to ask new things of the human body. Forests thinned, open spaces widened, and the air grew warmer and drier in many regions. What once had been a comfortable covering slowly turned into a burden. Thick hair, which had trapped warmth so effectively before, now held heat in for too long. Long walks under an open sky became exhausting, and bodies overheated more easily during the hottest hours of the day. Those who could release heat more efficiently found it easier to move, to hunt, and to endure the long journeys between water and food. Cooling became the quiet challenge of survival. Sweating, still limited in heavily furred bodies, offered a hint of a solution. Over time, individuals with slightly less body hair lost heat more effectively. They recovered faster after exertion and could remain active when others had to stop. These advantages were small, almost invisible, but in nature, small advantages accumulate. The loss of fur did not happen suddenly, and it did not happen evenly. Patches thinned first, then expanded, generation by generation. Hair retreated from areas most exposed to heat and exertion. With each change, the human body became more dependent on the skin itself to manage temperature. Sweat glands became more active, turning evaporation into a powerful cooling tool. Movement under the sun grew easier and endurance improved. Yet this new freedom came with an unexpected cost. For the first time, large areas of human skin were directly exposed to daylight. What had once been filtered through layers of hair now reached the surface without resistance. The sun was no longer just warmth and light. It became a force acting directly on flesh. Sunburns, irritation, and long-term damage quietly increased, though early humans had no language to describe these sensations as anything more than discomfort or weakness. This was a turning point, though no one living through it could have recognized it as such. The body had traded one kind of protection for another form of efficiency. Cooling meant survival, but exposure meant risk. Evolution rarely offers perfect solutions. It reshapes problems rather than eliminating them. As fur receded, the skin beneath, once largely irrelevant, became the front line between the body and the environment. Children were born with slightly different bodies than their parents, and those differences mattered more now. Skin that responded better to constant sunlight offered subtle benefits, even if the reasons were not understood. Damage accumulated slowly, often appearing later in life, but its effects could still shape survival and reproduction. The sun's influence extended beyond comfort, quietly interacting with cells, blood, and biological processes that early humans could not see. Despite these risks, the advantages of shedding fur were too great to reverse. Humans became creatures of endurance, capable of travelling long distances in the heat while many animals rested. This ability opened new ways of living, tracking animals over time, gathering scattered resources, and expanding into open landscapes that once seemed hostile. Bare skin, once rare, became increasingly common. The human body was changing its relationship with the sun, step by careful step. What began as a solution to heat would soon demand another adaptation in return. The surface of the body, newly exposed, was about to become one of the most important evolutionary frontiers humans had ever known. With the body now open to the sky, the sun began to leave marks that went far beyond surface discomfort. Days spent moving across open ground brought more than warmth. They brought injury that could not always be seen. Skin reddened and cracked, wounds healed slowly, fatigue set in more deeply after long exposure. What had once felt like a constant companion in the sky gradually revealed a harsher side, acting on the body in ways no early human could understand or explain. Inside the skin, invisible damage accumulated. The energy carried by sunlight disrupted the smallest building blocks of life, interfering with the careful copying of cells. Mistakes appeared where none had existed before. Over time, these errors weakened bodies, shortened lifespans, and reduced the chance of producing healthy offspring. The effects were not dramatic or immediate. They unfolded quietly, often long after the day's heat had faded. This made the danger difficult to recognize, yet no less real. Certain individuals fared better than others. Some recovered more easily from long days under the sun. Their skin resisted injury, and their bodies maintained strength longer into adulthood. Pregnancies were more successful, infants more likely to survive their earliest years. These differences were subtle, but in a world where survival rested on narrow margins, subtle differences shaped the future. The sun now acted as a constant filter, shaping which bodies endured and which did not. It did not strike suddenly like a predator or famine. Instead, it applied pressure every day, across every season, across every generation. Each hour of exposure mattered. Each long walk beneath an open sky became part of an unspoken test. Communities adapted behaviourally at first. People sought shade when possible, rested during the brightest hours, and favoured early mornings or evenings for movement. But behaviour alone could not fully escape the sun's reach. Food, water, and opportunity often lay far from shelter. Exposure was unavoidable, and so the body itself began to carry the burden of defence. Over generations, the sun reshaped humanity without announcing its presence. It influenced who lived long enough to teach, to lead, to reproduce. Those whose bodies managed its effects more effectively left more descendants, even if the reasons were never visible. The skin, once a passive boundary, became an active participant in survival. What made this pressure especially powerful was its consistency. Unlike changing climates or sudden disasters, the sun was relentless. It rose every day with the same intensity, offering no negotiation. Evolution responded not with dramatic leaps, but with gradual refinements, tiny biological shifts that accumulated slowly, shaping populations over immense spans of time. The relationship between humans and the sun had changed permanently. No longer merely a source of light and warmth, it became a force that demanded adaptation. The challenge was clear, even if it was not yet understood: survive beneath the sun or quietly disappear. The solution would emerge not through tools or shelter alone, but through changes written directly into the human body itself. The answer did not arrive suddenly, and it did not announce itself. It emerged quietly, carried within the smallest variations between one body and the next. In some individuals, the skin responded differently to constant sunlight. Cells began producing slightly higher amounts of a natural pigment that absorbed and scattered harmful radiation before it could reach deeper tissues. At first, the change was barely noticeable, a faint deepening of tone that held no meaning beyond its function. This pigment acted like a filter, intercepting energy that would otherwise disrupt the delicate processes inside the body. Where it was more abundant, damage accumulated more slowly. Skin remained stronger. Cellular repair worked more reliably. These advantages did not make anyone faster or stronger in obvious ways, but they extended resilience. Over long lives lived outdoors, that resilience mattered. Children born with this subtle protection were more likely to reach adulthood in good health. Their bodies endured repeated exposure with fewer long-term consequences. Over time, these children became parents, and their traits quietly passed forward. No generation noticed a sharp divide between themselves and those who came before. Change unfolded so slowly that it felt like continuity rather than transformation. What mattered was not appearance, but function. The pigment did not exist to create identity or difference. It existed because it worked. Nature favoured solutions that required no conscious effort, no behaviour to learn, no shelter to build. This adaptation travelled within the body itself, present at birth, active every day. As generations stretched into millennia, the accumulation of these small changes reshaped entire populations. Skin tones gradually deepened, especially in regions where sunlight struck with greatest intensity. This was not uniform or immediate. Variation remained, but the overall direction was clear. The balance between exposure and protection shifted in favour of survival. The process was slow enough to avoid disruption. There was no single moment when humanity changed course. Instead, countless lifetimes blended together, each contributing a fraction of progress. Evolution rarely rushes, it refines. The rise of this pigment was a lesson in patience, demonstrating how powerful gradual change can be when guided by consistent pressure. Importantly, this adaptation did not isolate humans from their environment. It allowed continued movement, endurance, and exploration under open skies. The body could now meet the sun more directly without paying the same hidden costs as before. Life continued across wide landscapes, sustained by a form of protection that required no tools and left no trace in the archaeological record. By the time darker skin became common, it felt natural, unremarkable, and permanent. No memory remained of a time when it was otherwise. What had begun as a faint biological adjustment became a defining feature, shaped not by intention but by necessity. This was not an endpoint, but a foundation. The body had answered one challenge, securing a future beneath a powerful sun. That answer would echo forward, influencing every step humanity took from this point on, carrying with it the quiet proof that survival is often decided by the smallest, most patient changes of all. The benefits of this slow transformation became evident in ways that early humans could never articulate. Those whose skin carried more pigment moved under the sun with fewer consequences. Burns that once left open sores now occurred rarely, and the relentless toll of ultraviolet radiation was softened by the protective layer within the skin. Cells could replicate with fewer errors, preserving the integrity of bodies in ways invisible to the eye. Life became more predictable, if not easier, for those who carried these subtle advantages. Pregnancy, a delicate and critical stage of human life, became safer in this new balance. Folate, a vital nutrient for the development of the brain and spine, remained more stable when skin was shielded from excessive radiation. Mothers endured the sun's glare with fewer complications, and infants emerged healthier and stronger. Survival rates edged upward, imperceptibly at first, then increasingly over generations. Every successful birth reinforced the presence of protective traits, passing them quietly into the next lineage. The advantages extended beyond reproduction. Adults with darker skin could travel longer distances without debilitating burns or fatigue, improving their ability to hunt, forage, and explore. Communities thrived when more members remained healthy into middle and old age, able to teach, share knowledge, and carry the burdens of survival. Protection from the sun became a hidden engine of endurance, subtly guiding who lived long enough to influence their surroundings. Nature's measure of success was not dramatic. It worked quietly, not through sudden leaps, but through repetition across countless lifetimes. Individuals who fared poorly under the sun often did not survive long enough to reproduce as successfully, while those with enhanced pigmentation endured and multiplied. Over time, the composition of populations shifted in a way that reflected the pressures of daily life, written not in stone or artifact, but on living bodies. The effect was cumulative. Each generation inherited not just a physical trait, but a pattern of survival. Communities in the sun-scorched landscapes of Africa gradually carried this invisible advantage collectively. Skin tone, once inconsequential, became a silent ledger of resilience, encoding a history of endurance and adaptation. Every face, every arm, every hand carried the story of countless days spent beneath relentless skies. This was evolution in motion, subtle and patient. The human body had found a way to meet a relentless force with quiet strength. Darker skin was not merely a shield, it was a mark of continuity, a sign that life had persisted where it might have faltered. The survival of individuals had begun to define the survival of entire communities, establishing patterns that would echo for millennia to come. In time, this adaptation set the stage for future generations to explore broader landscapes with confidence. The challenges posed by the sun remained, but the human body was now equipped with a first line of defense written into every cell. Life continued, stronger, more durable, and more capable, proving that sometimes the most important changes are those that happen quietly, leaving their trace not in monuments or records, but in the flesh itself. Beneath the surface, the story of survival deepened in ways that could not be seen with the naked eye. Dark skin did more than prevent burns or preserve energy. It quietly safeguarded the very building blocks of life within. Folate, a vitamin circulating in the blood, played a role so critical that any loss could alter the course of a lifetime. It shaped the formation of the spine and the development of the brain, guiding growth in ways subtle yet profound. Without sufficient protection, ultraviolet light threatened to deplete this essential nutrient, leaving individuals more vulnerable to complications that could influence reproduction and survival. Those whose skin carried more pigment experienced an unseen advantage. Their blood preserved folate more effectively, even under long hours of sunlight. Pregnancies proceeded with fewer complications, and the next generation's neural development benefited from this quiet defense. Brains grew larger, spines formed more reliably, and the foundations of human cognition were strengthened, not through intention, but through natural selection acting over countless lifetimes. What appeared as simply darker skin was, in fact, a safeguard for intelligence and survival, an invisible strategy written into flesh. This protection allowed humans to push their limits in ways that earlier generations could not. Endurance hunting, migration across open landscapes, and the demands of prolonged exposure became possible not just because the skin withstood burns, but because the body's inner systems remained intact. Neural and skeletal development proceeded unimpeded, giving rise to greater capacity for learning, coordination, and problem-solving. Communities became more capable as a result, their members stronger and more adaptable. Evolution operates in layers, often unseen, and here it worked quietly through the interplay of skin, blood, and nutrient. Dark pigmentation was both armor and silent facilitator, allowing survival strategies to flourish while simultaneously laying the groundwork for more complex human capabilities. The advantages were cumulative and long-term. They shaped potential across generations rather than providing immediate, visible rewards. It was a subtle form of engineering, written by nature without guidance or foresight. Every child born with adequate folate benefited from the protective qualities of their own skin, a self-contained system of preservation. Over time, these hidden advantages contributed to a population capable of greater endurance, higher cognition, and more intricate social behaviors. The body had found a way to secure its future in the quietest of ways, by shielding the very substance that allowed the mind to expand. By protecting folate, melanin became more than a pigment. It became a facilitator of human potential. The sun, once a threat, was now balanced by a natural shield that allowed exploration, growth, and the slow accumulation of knowledge. Dark skin was not merely a response to the environment, it was a partner in the evolution of the mind, laying the foundation for a species that would one day build, invent, and imagine far beyond the limitations of survival alone. In this way, the story of human adaptation was not only about facing heat or light, it was about nurturing what would become the essence of humanity itself. The quiet chemistry of blood and vitamins, safeguarded by melanin, carried forward the seeds of intelligence, endurance, and resilience, forming a legacy that would echo in every generation to come. In the heart of equatorial Africa, where the sun ruled the sky with relentless intensity, dark skin became more than an adaptation, it became the standard of survival. Generations spent under its glare shaped communities in ways no tool or shelter could replicate. The landscapes were unforgiving, open savannas, shimmering heat waves over grasslands, and skies so bright that even a brief exposure could mark the flesh. In this environment, lighter skin offered no advantage. It exposed the body to injury and long-term damage. Dark pigmentation, however, acted as a natural armor, a continuous, invisible protection woven into every cell. As populations grew and spread across diverse terrains within these equatorial zones, the predominance of darker skin became absolute. It was no longer a rare variation or a subtle trait. It was the signature of life adapted perfectly to the land. Children were born into it, their survival quietly reinforced by the protection it afforded. Daily life, once fraught with the dangers of sun exposure, became more sustainable. Adults could travel farther in search of water and food, tend to their communities, and endure the heat without suffering the immediate or cumulative consequences that had once plagued their ancestors. The shift was biological, not aesthetic. Skin tone, though visible, carried a practical story that no words could capture. It told of thousands of years of exposure, of countless decisions shaped by sunlight rather than intention. Each body that carried darker skin was a testament to a silent conversation between the human form and the environment, between survival and risk, endurance and fragility. In every individual, the sun's energy was intercepted, its destructive power diffused, allowing life to continue where it might have faltered. Life under the sun also shaped culture, movement, and behavior. Communities settled in ways that balanced exposure with necessity. Daily routines, hunting patterns, and gathering expeditions were structured around sunlight, yet the constant protection of melanin allowed humans to exploit their environment fully. They could endure midday heat, traverse long distances, and engage with the world with less fear of invisible threats. Their bodies carried the proof of adaptation silently, making extended activity in the equatorial wilderness possible. Over centuries, the shield of dark skin became a defining feature of humanity in these regions. It was a trait selected not by preference or beauty, but by the immutable geography that demanded resilience. Nature had favored a solution that required no thought, no invention, simply a body shaped to meet its surroundings. Each generation inherited this advantage, reinforcing its prevalence until it was nearly universal in the populations that thrived under the harsh African sun. In this way, dark skin was not merely a physical characteristic. It was a record of survival, a living archive of adaptation written directly on human flesh. It testified to the intimate relationship between species and landscape, to the quiet power of evolutionary pressures, and to the remarkable capacity of humans to endure in harmony with one of the planet's most demanding environments. The African sun, once a potential threat, had forged one of humanity's most enduring shields, a legacy that would persist even as populations began to migrate beyond its direct influence. Time stretched across millennia, and with it the slow artistry of evolution unfolded. Each generation inherited not just life, but a subtle record of exposure, endurance, and adaptation. Children were born into a world bathed in relentless sunlight, their skin carrying the invisible lessons of countless ancestors. The tones that once varied from faintly deepened shades to darker hues gradually coalesced, guided by the constant pressure of the equatorial sun. Over tens of thousands of years, these subtle differences merged into a stable spectrum, one that reflected survival rather than choice. The process was almost imperceptible to those living it. A child with slightly more protection than a sibling might thrive more fully, but the reasons remained unseen. Over centuries, these quiet advantages accumulated generation after generation. The sun sculpted humanity not with immediate force, but with patient insistence, shaping bodies in ways that became increasingly refined. Every individual was both a product and a participant in this ongoing work, a living canvas upon which light left its mark. Skin became a medium of survival, its tone a mirror of environmental necessity. It absorbed, diffused, and moderated energy in a way that preserved the inner workings of the body, allowing neural development, reproductive success, and physical endurance to proceed with fewer interruptions. Communities across the African landscape gradually carried this uniform advantage, their members more resilient under the daily glare of sunlight. Variation persisted, but the overall pattern had settled into a reliable and consistent form, a testament to the quiet but relentless pressure of nature. Beyond protection, this stability allowed humans to interact with their environment in new ways. Movement across long distances, sustained foraging, and the observation of patterns in animals and weather were all possible because the body could withstand exposure without the constant threat of cellular damage. Darker skin was not merely a shield, it was a tool for exploring, for surviving, for understanding the world at a pace and scale that had been impossible in earlier generations. As generations accumulated, the pattern became self-reinforcing. Individuals whose skin carried optimal protection survived and reproduced more consistently. Their descendants inherited these traits, and those traits became more prevalent across the population. By the time tens of thousands of years had passed, the work of the sun was complete in its slow, methodical way. Skin tones had stabilized, reflecting a delicate balance between exposure and defense, between environmental pressure and biological response. In this vast sweep of time, sunlight emerged as a sculptor of humanity itself, tracing lines across flesh, blood, and bone with relentless consistency. The human body was not a passive subject, but an active participant in this enduring dialogue. Each generation carried forward the legacy of survival, painted by light, preserved by nature, and etched into the very essence of what it meant to endure under the unyielding African sun. The story of skin was, in this way, inseparable from the story of life itself, a slow, patient testament to the power of time, light, and the quiet hand of evolution. As time passed, some groups of humans began to wander beyond the familiar rhythms of Africa. Rivers, valleys, and coastal plains guided migrations, leading individuals into landscapes where the sun no longer burned with the same intensity. Grasslands gave way to forests, open savannas to rolling hills, and the exposure that had once demanded constant protection now diminished. The very trait that had ensured survival under relentless sunlight, dark skin, suddenly faced a world where its advantages were less pressing and new pressures began to emerge. Travelling into these regions, humans encountered longer winters, shorter growing seasons, and stretches of clouded skies that softened the sunlight. Vitamin D, which the body synthesizes under ultraviolet rays, became more difficult to produce through thickly pigmented skin. What had once been a safeguard in equatorial Africa now slowed the body's access to essential nutrients. Survival demanded balance. The same shield that had preserved folate and prevented burns in one environment could hinder health in another. Nature's pressures were shifting with geography, rewriting the rules of endurance and adaptation. Communities adjusted in subtle ways, movement patterns changed. Diet became more varied to compensate for reduced sunlight. Exposure to the sky was no longer constant, and human bodies began to face new challenges. Those born with slightly lighter skin found it easier to absorb the diminished ultraviolet rays, producing enough vitamin D to maintain strong bones, immune systems, and reproductive health. Over generations, these slight advantages shaped the course of survival in northern climates, quietly altering the trajectory that had been established under Africa's fierce sun. Migration brought more than environmental change. It introduced new ecosystems, different foods, and varied seasonal rhythms. Humans had to adjust not only their behavior but their biology to match the slower accumulation of sunlight and shifting availability of resources. In some ways, the journey marked the beginning of a more complex interplay between body, landscape, and climate. The selective pressures that had been straightforward under Africa's equatorial glare now became layered and multifaceted, guiding evolution in directions that no one could foresee. This period set the stage for gradual transformations that would unfold over thousands of years. Populations that settled in northern and temperate regions slowly exhibited changes in skin tone, reflecting a delicate compromise between the need for protection and the need to harness sunlight for essential processes. The story of dark skin, once a universal marker of resilience in Africa, became more variable, influenced by distance, climate, and exposure. Yet even as humans moved into weaker sunlight, the legacy of the sun in Africa remained written in their bodies. Dark skin continued to carry the memory of survival, a testament to countless generations shaped by relentless light. Migration did not erase that history, it layered it, introducing new challenges while preserving the echoes of adaptation. Humanity was learning, generation by generation, that survival depended not only on the traits of the past, but on the capacity to respond to the ever-changing demands of the world. In leaving Africa, humans carried with them both the protection that had ensured life and the beginning of a new evolutionary story, one that would unfold under skies far less familiar. Long before the first stone tools were shaped by hand, long before settlements rose along rivers, or the first words were spoken to organize thought, the human body carried a solution to one of its most pressing challenges. Dark skin was not decorative, not symbolic, and not conscious in its purpose. It was a technology crafted by the slow, patient hands of evolution. Each cell, each strand of pigment, served as a barrier against a threat that had no regard for strength, ingenuity, or cleverness. In this sense, the body itself had become the earliest tool, a living mechanism honed for survival under the harsh sun of Africa. This adaptation was silent but profound. Unlike spears or shelters, it required no planning, no instruction, no deliberate effort. It existed because it worked. Individuals who carried it could endure longer, travel farther, reproduce more reliably, and pass these advantages to their descendants. Communities stabilized and thrived because their members were physically equipped to meet the environment head-on. Dark skin did not simply protect, it enabled action, movement, and resilience on a scale that had never been necessary before. The significance of this adaptation becomes even clearer when viewed across the sweep of prehistory. Human history is often told through the artifacts we leave behind, the inventions that mark progress. Yet here was a survival strategy that predates all of that. It shaped life in ways invisible to the eye but fundamental to the continuity of the species. Every birth, every season survived, and every child who reached maturity carried the proof of this quiet triumph. Civilization itself would later depend on the endurance that this early adaptation allowed, forming the foundation for everything humans would eventually build. Dark skin was more than a shield. It was a demonstration of how life responds to persistent challenge. It balanced internal chemistry, protected reproductive success, and preserved the potential for intelligence to flourish. Without it, early humans would have been far more vulnerable to the same sunlight that bathed the landscapes they called home. Their capacity to explore, to migrate, to learn from the world around them, and ultimately to shape it in turn, depended in part on the subtle pigment woven into their flesh. Even as humanity eventually spread to distant lands, and as variations in skin tone emerged in response to new environments, the original adaptation retained its significance. It stands as a reminder that survival often relies on innovations that cannot be carved, built, or written, but must exist within the very body itself. Before fire, before shelter, before speech, the first great human technology was already present, a living, responsive, and enduring defense against one of nature's most relentless forces. In this light, dark skin emerges as more than biology. It is the story of ingenuity without intention, of resilience without design, and of a species shaped from its earliest days by a challenge it could not escape. It is the quiet triumph of evolution, a foundation on which all of humanity's later achievements would rest, and a testament to the enduring power of life to meet adversity, adapt, and endure.